Okay, I will be monitoring the chat if anyone wants to put a question in the chat. But go ahead, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us to today's presentation session. And also, thank you very much for being with us today. Well, as introduced, this is our topic, and my name is Natsumi Onaka from Iwate University.
Okay, and I'm Dan Newbury. I'm from actually Fuji. Sorry, Edo. Yeah, I'm from Fuji University down in Hanamaki. So
sorry about that.
No problem.
And I'm Jacob Petersen from Iwate University as well.
Okay, so we are the team. Okay, first the introduction. And first, I'd like to introduce the new points and what is important about this project. There are mainly 5 points that is important.
Excuse me, Natsumi, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
There seems to be a block on the screen you're sharing at the top in the middle.
Can you move over? There is a.
Okay.
Okay. This is
kind of gone. Yeah.
Yeah, that moved to the left. I think we're okay now.
Okay. And the first, everyone is familiar with the Japanese students. They just shut down and do nothing because they are not confident in using English for communication, and they are too much concerned about being accurate. So we evaluate non-verbal communication and interactional competence more than other kinds of assessment system. And the second one is non-specific levels. We have at the university, we have from between A2 and B1 level. That is a majority. So we are focusing on this level. And localized topics. For internationally well-known speaking tests, they use the topics that Japanese students cannot talk about. So we want to relate those topics to the Japanese students so that they can talk about it. And then location independent, which is when we try to assess or organize a kind of speaking test, then you have to manage the student's schedule and the assessor's schedule and all these small things. But it takes a lot of time and so it will be really a pain. So we'd like to remove that kind of pain using this system. And then the teacher support. Even if you once have a perfect system, if you don't try to maintain the standard, it is very difficult to keep the system going. So these 5 points are the new ones. And then in next slide, this is what you can see. You can read these 4 points. And by the way, this is supported by the Kakenhi grant. And if you take a look at this chapter chart, the teacher assessor interlocutor will talk to the students, and two test takers will interact with the interlocutor. And sometimes the interlocutor and the test taker, or between test takers, they interact, and all of which will be recorded. And then using the rubric stored in Moodle and watching the video, the third-person assessors who are trained regularly will assess and then decide the score, and then that score will be sent to the teacher who teaches these students. And this is the teacher who will give the final grade. So this is the main, the scheme of this whole program. And then, Dan, do you want to talk?
Okay, yes. Yeah, also everyone, thanks for coming to our presentation today. Yeah, I'm going to talk right now a little bit about the abilities framework upon which the rubric is based. And just a little bit of background about assessment regarding testing. In some cases, the assessment and their results will be based on events local to the classroom. So for example, if the teacher asks students to give a presentation, for example, what is your favorite place in Japan? The teacher will probably build a scale or a checklist just to check to make sure that the students use the language that they were requested to in that assignment. But once we want to generalize outside of a specific class, like for example, saying that the student is, an intermediate level and having other teachers and other people understand what that is, we're probably going to need to use an abilities framework. And the one, actually, we kind of used two for this project. We used the CEFR and then the CEFRJ, which is the Japanese version of the CEFR. And I'm going to go ahead and do a quick explanation of both of those. Jacob, can you switch the slide, please? Okay, so just to let you know, probably most of you have heard of the CEFR. We're all English teachers, but even if you have not, I will give a quick explanation of that. It is the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And then as of, I believe it was 2012, the Japanese version of that, the CEFRJ, was created to localize the CEFR standards. And just some background for the CEFR, there are 6 levels in it that goes from A1 to C2. Those levels, in fact, break down to actually 3 kind of groups of speakers. There are the basic speakers, which are kind of A1 to, or A's to a little bit lower B's. There's the independent speaker, which are the B speakers, and then there's the proficient level, which is anywhere from kind of high intermediate, what we probably think of as higher intermediate, to close to native speaker. For our specific project here, out of the CEFR, one thing that I did not know before beginning this project was just how powerful the CEFR is and how many tools it has. The tools out of the CEFR that we use to help build our rubric, we used about 3 main ones. There's the global scales, and those are probably what most people, if you've heard of the CEFR and perhaps you've seen it listed on your textbooks, those are kind of based on the global scales. There are the can-do descriptors, and the can-do descriptors are actually self-assessment tools for students. They are also what the CEFRJ are based on. The CEFRJ was basically the can-do descriptors were given to Japanese students to see how Japanese students rated those and leveled those. And so the first part of the CEFRJ was actually based on these can-do descriptors. And that's just tasks like going to a doctor's office or scheduling an appointment. And then the third thing I have pointed out here is the illustrative scales. These are actually the most powerful because they are the most detailed. And so these offer you information, anything from fluency, vocabulary range. I actually deleted it this morning, I'm sorry. Stuff like how someone would perform in a discussion. And so we really have a lot of useful things that we can pull out of the CEFR and subsequently the CEFRJ. So that's what the scales that we are using, or the rubric that we are using, is based on for this study. And yeah, I'm going to finish that part there.
Okay, and then this CEFRJ is operated or identified by a big member of a group, the team. And what is good about it is it is good to know that CEFRJ spoken interaction criteria has been developed and with observable measurement. This is really good because going to doctors, but in Japan, people don't go to doctors in English, speaking English. So what can we see? So if you take a look at, this is a translation from the Japanese version to English. And this is a 3-point scale of spoken interaction. One is the lowest and 3 is the highest. 2 is the average, and it's the completed, the satisfactory level. If you compare, for example, A to 1 and A to 2, 1 is a low and 2 is high in that range. And you can see 1 needs some concrete visual material to explain something, but 2, you could do it. but it's basically the simple sentence. So there is a observable measurement criteria here identified. So it is good for us to use this when we assess the students' spoken interaction. So this is what we are relying on.
Okay, yeah, so back over to me. In building the rubric, one of the main things that I did, I've learned many things, but one of the things that I've noticed the most is how to orient the rubric to either positive or negative within what the test takers can do. And so I consider myself to be a teacher in communicative language teaching, where I try to get the students to focus primarily on meaning as opposed to the mechanics of the language. And in fact, when we first started developing the rubric and this test, I was actually the first round of the rubric, I found myself grading really low, giving a lot of low scores. And in fact, I talked to Jacob, who had contact with a student, and he noted that this particular student was actually a really good English speaker. And I just didn't see that in the scores that I was assigning. I actually assigned the student a 1 across like the lowest level. And so what that kind of got me to do is to rethink how we were going to make this rubric. And I did a little bit of research, and I came up, CEFRJ is actually the person who produced or offered the information that I'm about to show you. He talks about strategies that you could test. It would be a little bit difficult to test these, but we can absolutely see the students using these strategies in how they're speaking. And so I'd like to explain those. Jacob, can you change the slide, please? Okay, so in fact, there are 2 strategies. The first one that I'm going to talk about is avoidance. It's an avoidance strategy, and CEFRJ breaks that down into two kinds of, or 2 categories within the avoidance strategies. The first one here is formal, and it's where a speaker would avoid using some part of the target language system. An example given in the research is, for example, maybe a student won't talk about going shopping because they don't feel comfortable that they have enough language to talk about that. So they'll just avoid specific subjects that they just don't have the vocabulary. They feel they don't have the vocabulary to carry out. The second one here is functional, and that's where the student will just basically clam up. They will not talk. They abandon a conversation. And as CEFRJ points out, this is the worst of the 2. It's basically where you get non-communication. And so those are kind of in our rubric, we mark those down a little bit. They show lack of wanting to communicate. And so let's go ahead and look at the next strategy that we have. These are achievement strategies, and these are seen positively inside of our rubric. I have given about 3 examples here. There are actually about 7 or 8 strategies that students will use when you're working inside of the achievement sphere. And one of those is overgeneralization. I'm sure we've all heard, I was really interested in, or actually what students will say, yeah, it was interested, or they'll kind of change over the words that they should be using. They won't use that language correctly, but we can kind of get an idea of what they're trying to say. And then, of course, bide or bod, and that's just where they're carrying over what they do know about the target language, in this case, English, and they're just making blanket changes in the language. They haven't figured out the little idiosyncrasies within the language. Another one is where a student will approximate. So they, I drove to Eon, as opposed to they'll use I went to Eon instead of using I drove to Eon. So there just won't be as specific as they could be, but they're still communicating. And then one thing that we did get quite a bit into within the rubric used in this study is non-linguistic strategies. I have been watching a lot of how students will use their eyes to kind of pull the other students into the conversation, make sure that their interlocutor is actually understanding what they're saying, using gestures, hand gestures with each other. And so, yeah, again, this is a small subset of achievement strategies, but we in fact have designed the rubric to reward these achievement strategies and not reward avoidance strategies. So what we're going to do next, we are actually going to listen to a sample of a student that I think will show what we're trying to do here. So yeah, can we play that, please? Thank you.
Can about the topic on the screen. You have 1 minute. Please read the question on the screen and begin.
Tell us about your university life. Tell us about your university life. Yeah, this university is so nature and feel enjoyable because my field of study is so fantastic to learn. So my major is American literature and second language acquisition, and my professor is so kind, and so my teachers teach me to some much information on how to research, and of course in their field of studies knowledge. And
okay, and that's just a cut of a sample that we pulled. Again, if you'll look in here, we highlighted a few grammatical, lexical mistakes, but if you actually, I think pretty much everyone here can understand what the student is trying to say. And so as opposed to penalizing the student for making a mistake with, for example, feel enjoyable, especially down lower, my second language acquisition, and my professor is so kind. That kind of mistake, that's I guess, looking back on the slide just before, we could categorize these as achievement strategies, in fact. And so our rubric, the rubric that's used in the study, rewards that kind of language, as opposed to what we could have shown was, I decided not to do a B for time, but yeah, a lot of students perhaps don't say a lot where they would have the opportunity to say something. So yeah, I'll go ahead and finish up that part. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to lessons learned. Actually, this is still Dan, I believe. Right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, lessons learned. Just in the delivery of the interviews and having the interviews, these are just a few points that I think we pulled out just before the getting ready for the presentation. For example, have a seat, which is quite a common phrase, as everybody knows, in English, but a lot of lower level students or beginner students don't know that phrase. So we had to tone down everything and kind of make everything so that the students are not getting penalized for not knowing the instructions of the test. Speaking slowly, clearly enunciating, as here, and also using body language. So for example, welcoming the student into the classroom with a hand wave. These kinds of things, they add up to helping the student, helping us focus on getting the language we need to actually do the assessment, as opposed to getting a student who's maybe a little nervous because they're not understanding what's going on with just the structure of the test. So these are just a couple of points about that.
And then
yes, my turn. Well, the goal of the English of education, encourage students to be able to communicate in English, is not to memorize, knowing about and being able to demonstrate the topics and expressions studied in the semester. But it tends to be that way in many English conversation tests. Especially after the semester, I've overheard the conversation going and said, this is just a simple memorization. But rather, we would like to see the utilizing the expressions and the formatting of ideas studied in the semester in a real conversation, so that they know how to express their meaning, even though there are some, mistakes here and there. As far as they can say what they wanted to say, that's our goal. But when you look at the international speaking test, for example, here are some sample questions. Which room is your favorite room in your house and why? Well, many students live in one-room apartment. Which room? I got only one room and a bathroom. That's all. Kitchen and even the living room, together. So it's very difficult for them to say their favorite room, even though they understood what the question was about. And the second one, you were invited to a home party by your friend. Talk about which gift will be suitable for your friend with your partner. Well, you never get to be invited to a home party. They would rather go to, they are high school kids. They don't have a party like a Western style. So instead of these questions they cannot relate to, we would like to suggest the following sample questions suitable for Japanese college students, recommending a suitable part-time jobs from a selection. They see different kinds of part-time jobs. Which one is suitable for this person, like Kimura-san? Which one? Well, paying higher or, closer to the campus and things like that. And recommending a club activity to international students. They want to make friends. Japanese level is not much required. Okay, how about this? How about that? And we give the activities to choose from. So these kind of questions will be more suitable for our students, we think.
Okay. And now I'm going to talk about some more lessons we learned as well. So our tests had a couple different types of questions, well, a few different ones. One was just a general, we ask a question. One was we show a PowerPoint slide with some images with a prompting question. And we also had a question type where they see a video with no sound and they just have to talk about what's happening in the video. And so about the image questions, we realized some of the images didn't make enough sense to the students. So for example, here's one of our questions we played with before. We said, sorry, I gotta move that around. So some of these images may not have made sense to the students. So for example, this one here, the students may not be viewing that as someone being angry, right? This image itself here, she doesn't look upset to the students. It's like a normal student studying or taking a test. So to them, that's not a big deal. And another image here is it's kind of hard to see that he's actually dropping ice cream. And so we have to make sure the image is very, obvious. Like the coffee spill is pretty obvious, but the ice cream one was not, right? And then another test image questions. Another problem we have with the test images were the questions themselves sometimes contain confusing vocabulary. So back to this example we had, discuss a time when you're sad or angry with your partner. This is actually the second version of this slide. We originally tried it with discuss a time you were upset with and discuss it with your partner. And some of the lower level students didn't understand what we meant by upset. And they actually asked the test giver, what does that mean? And so we realized we should, make it so the directions and the questions are obvious enough the students can just use their English without, being confused. And also students sometimes didn't know how to engage with the questions themselves. So for example, we had this image here where Tim wants to make friends at school. What do you recommend to him? So the students understood the kendo, but maybe they didn't quite understand some of the things like volunteering, like it's people picking up trash. So what does that mean, right? Or karaoke or a party. This is actually a very Western image of karaoke. It's not like a booth and people singing and whatnot. And so the students were not connecting with the images themselves as well sometimes. And also we had some feedback. We talked to some of the students we were testing these questions with, and they had a hard time connecting sometimes when the students, like in the question example, didn't look like them as well. So we had this Tim character here, but then some students didn't really connect because, like, I'm not an exchange student. I don't, have any recommendations. And then, sorry, I saw my chat popped up because I'm the host. So after that, we switched to an Asian looking character, and her name is Kimura-san. So something like that was easy to make changes. But the test videos too, we've also had some issues. We realized we had to make the test videos somewhere where we can kind of guess which way the direction the conversation is going to go. Because if it's too open-ended, sometimes it can be very random what the students will do. I'm going to show an example of a test, and I'll talk test question, and I'll talk about what happened with it. And don't worry, there's no sound, so it's just a video only. So as you can see, a really short video where two students run into each other. I'm trying to move the, come on, next slide. There we go. Okay, whatever. The two students run into each other. And so we wanted to talk about, the students weren't paying attention. They walked into each other. She dropped her papers. He dropped his papers. She helped him pick up her papers, things like that. Most of the students did that generally. We had a couple of students talk about, being, not paying attention on their cell phone and whatnot, which is fine. But a couple of the other students, we had two different sets of students who actually took it in a random tangent, saying it's going to be a love story. They're going to fall in love and start dating each other like it's a Korean drama. We're like, where is this coming from? And they quickly got outside of their field of English usage because they were trying to talk about like romantic situations, which was very awkward for them. So we realized we should make some questions that are pretty obvious. And then finally, we have some Moodle hangups as well. As we mentioned earlier, we have the tests in Moodle. It works fine for the assessors, but it's kind of clunky on the back end. So like, as sound booth here, these guys, setting up a stage. On the back end, I have to set up everything for the assessors. And so it's kind of clunky to add everything into it. But we're looking at maybe trying to find some more plugins and make it easier. And then that's it. Now we just have question time. I think we stopped right on 30 minutes, so we have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely plenty of time for questions. There's one in the chat. Do you want to talk about that one, Jacob?
For the questions using pictures, despite you asking for a time, did you find that students would limit themselves to experiences? Yeah, so actually they weren't, it depends. We had different types of picture questions. We had one, I didn't show it. One was like a Kimura-san is looking for a part-time job. And we had like three different pictures with the job types and like some like hourly wage, how far they are from the school. They stuck to pretty well. Other ones though, like we had one talking about what you're going to do on the weekend. And we had some images like, hiking and playing sports and whatnot. And the students actually went and talked about their actual plans. And so they were able to navigate away from the pictures when requested. So yes, sorry. I didn't read out your question very loud. I kind of mumbled to myself. Sorry.
You're muted.
I know. I have one more question though. Can we see the rubric that you guys created?
We're not
planning. I could share it with you.
Well, I'm really curious, like the whole, we're talking about this rubric, and I was very interested in like the part of the rubric that was measuring like what were you talking about, like nonverbal clues. That kind of, when I first heard that, I'm like, how can you measure that? But then like listening to the explanation, it actually, I'm thinking about my own experiences with students, like you definitely can understand like which students are like more motivated to communicate their ideas, no matter how difficult it might be. And then students who are more willing to just be like, oh, I can't do this. And like, that's, that is a big difference. So I'd be interested, if you have the rubric.
Okay, I could show, we've got two versions of it. The one that's out on the net right now, that's kind of the rubric, that's the grading rubric. I can show you what we've got as a global rubric, but it's not going to be real clear. Jacob, can I share something? Is that?
Yeah, share screen.
Okay, this is going to probably.
It's in flux. We're still developing it. We're going to the stages. We're going to ask some assessors to start trying it out.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so this is like a first, and this is actually out of a paper that we let me just kind of go through. So the rubric is actually 3 points, and can you see that clearly? Can you read that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you look down here, kind of towards the bottom of like the 3 point, and I'm going to try to highlight this for you. Speaker supports their interlocutor through nonverbals such as eye contact, attempts to keep unnatural gaps in the conversation at a minimum. So trying to keep that unnatural, strange, very gappy, it's not a conversation, you know what I'm talking about. And just general trying to make sure that everyone is understanding, or their interlocutor is understanding them. And then also rejoinders such as, yeah, I know. We do have some students at the upper levels that will actually use, oh yeah, I know about that, or yeah, I know. Whereas if we look down here, so that's the nonverbal there. If we look down at number 2, one moment, I'm going to highlight this. Gaze is a big one, like where they're trying to use that eye contact, and they'll use back channeling, but usually that's going to be based on like a Japanese would say, the making sure that
like that. Okay, I was just going to ask what back channeling was. I mean,
okay,
like short.
That's right. Just confirmation that
yes, okay.
Yeah, the listener's understanding what's going on, which by the way is twice as common in Japanese as it is in English. So it's if they're not using that, we know there's a problem. And so if you'll go down here to just the one, there's not a big explanation here, but yeah, we just got, very no eye contact, just sitting there, which we have had a couple of those come through where they're just the minimum contact with who's sitting across the table from them.
So it sounds like in your test, you're expecting like a 3-way communication triangle between like the 2 students and then the interlocutor, who is not the examiner.
That's right. And actually, so the 2 students should be conversing back and forth. And so there's 4 tasks. And so the first 2 tasks are going to have the interviewer asking the test taker and talking to them, and that's going to be an interviewer test taker communication. And then we've got the last 3 tasks, 2 or 3, where the students should be talking to each other. And so that's where we're getting these measurements coming off the bat.
Would it help I give kind of a quick example? Like, for example, it'd be like, you get, let's say Simone and Catherine sit down. I say, okay, Simone, tell me about yourself, where you're from, and you talk. And all right, Catherine, tell me about your hometown, why, where are you from? Some kind of question type. I'll ask a couple different questions, and then I'll be like, all right, here's this picture, you two discuss it. Or like,
oh yeah, I know. I can imagine what the test is like. It sounds really similar to other kinds of like 3-person tests like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a good idea to have it's like the 3. I'm just kind of curious because it does not attempt to interact with their interlocutor. Oh, so like that would be on like the interlocutor interviewer and if they're just kind of like really quiet and like not responding to the questions, that would
looking
be
at their feet.
It's not like we're trying to involve all 3 people in this big conversation.
No.
I see.
No. Yeah.
That's actually a good point. Yeah, when we're grading them too, it's the score is not dependent on the other person, right?
That's kind of what I was kind of confused about. Thank you.
Yeah. It would actually be, if we don't have the actual rubric. It's actually one problem with the rubric at this point is it's about 1.5 pages long. It's it's clunky. Yeah, we're going to have to pull it into some better form, but it's there. So Yeah.
Rubric writing is hard. It's really hard to write a rubric that completely encapsulates like all of the things that, and you have to, I feel like you have to do a test a few times and like kind of work on your rubric as you go, because then you kind of realize, oh, this is what's going to happen, and like you can kind of like
Absolutely. Yeah, looking at what the students are
Fine-tune that
producing.
thing. Yes. We've done this several times. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So, how much time do you take explaining the rubric to the students before they're you do the task, or don't you at all?
Zero time. They are given, actually made a quick little video, 2-minute video that we share with them before, showing them what the test is like and what was expected of them, like a silly little video with 2 students sitting down and doing that, but with a little bubble saying do this or that, but like no pre-explanation of a rubric, no telling them what the questions are going to be. They're all just going in there like flying by the seat of their pants.
Okay.
We don't want them to be prepared for the test.
Sure, I understand that, but knowing what you're being assessed on would be helpful, I think. I mean, of course, you don't want to say, okay, we're going to, in this task, we're looking to see what if you're doing this or if you're doing that, but like talking about like an example, like Jacob just said, should be good enough. I mean, this is what we expect. This is an example of a successful test. So if you do this, then you'll be good. So that, I mean, I think that's enough.
Yeah, I think kind of back to that is like one example that a concrete example, if the student uses Japanese, we've debated this quite extensively. The use of Japanese in their output, we've, one of us, I won't say which has which opinion, but one says, yeah, if they use Japanese, they're bye-bye, one, bam. But yeah, that's that's a debate that's very difficult to pin down. But like you're saying, and I do very much agree, and it's actually written into the rubric, if they're being penalized for that, they absolutely need to know about that beforehand, because that's going to throw off a lot of, if they say one thing in Japanese and they get a 1, well, we need to tell them about that prior to taking the test. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think we all know those students who just they just tend to say certain things in Japanese like all the time, like students who know well, even though they're always just like, ne, or like, yeah, dayo ne, and this is little, the back channeling or the things.
Yeah, well, I think there's the expectation that the teachers are going to accept that, just because, of course, we're in Japan. We should know what they mean at certain points. But yeah, inside the testing system, we've either got to turn that completely off or tell them, you cannot, you're not allowed to say things in Japanese. So yeah, that's an ongoing discussion.
Yeah. So there's another question by Barry in the chat. If the interlocutors are not foreign language speakers, doesn't this really skew the level of language performance if you're trying to assess foreign language?
Actually, may I answer that? We are accommodating for that. So in fact, if I can go back to the rubric and show you parts of it, and I think Jacob is the one who coined the phrase, and it's probably around somewhere else, but it's empathetic listener. So
I didn't coin it. I stole it from somewhere in grad school.
Oh, did you? Okay. Well, I'm appropriating it from you, so I'm sorry. A double steal. Like we are, and I think I'm answering the question. We are accommodating. Of course, we are doing L2 in Japan, and so we do have to accommodate for being here. And so it does skew the rubric down, but we're accommodating that by including empathetic listener, or someone who's trying to understand. Does that answer the question?
I think he's also mentioning like the test giver and the test people scoring a test. And the idea is like they're going to be native English speaking teachers who are doing the grading and giving the tests. So yeah, the students will be having to interact with a native speaker.
Or even really proficient speakers.
Or
yeah, I mean, the reason I brought the point up originally, because the CEFRJ was originally a European framework where multilingualism is much more common. And trying to transfer that to a country like Japan that is mostly monolingual. I mean, you didn't specifically use the CEFRJ, but I mean, these kinds of assessments generally tend, in my opinion, not to transfer to real life.
Right.
Where the stress of having to deal with a foreign speaker who doesn't know Japanese usually boosts the competency because they have no other choice. They have to do it.
Right.
I mean, that was the case with my Japanese as well. You know, I purposely told my wife to go home, and I stayed in Tokyo by myself for a year to force myself to learn Japanese without any help. So that's the only reason I was really asking the question from a kind of real life stance compared to a classroom stance. Yeah, that was all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think coming like the CEFRJ accommodates that, like we're using the CEFRJ, I guess, and if you don't Dialang, it's the pre-CEFR can-do descriptors, but they've kind of, in the last couple of years, I don't know how long, they've actually added a lot more tools to the CEFRJ, such as Natsumi pointed out, the spoken interaction. And so we're able to accommodate for, what you're, well, I guess you're kind of asking, they're having to deal with the interviewer who's a native speaker, and how that affects. And so, yeah, that's a good, I mean, we could, I guess we probably, at some point, we are going to invite Japanese teachers to use this. Natsumi will maybe become an interviewer at some point down the road, and we can study the effects of that. Yeah, that's a good point, though.
Well, in Japan, we are not thinking about being perfect, speaking like a native speaker of English. We accept, very Japanese English as far as it makes sense to the foreign visitors or someone who doesn't understand Japanese at all. So that is our goal. And of course, the Japanese can be an interlocutor, but the problem is it's much easier, inviting almost, to the students to speak in Japanese. And is that okay, sensei? Something like that.